So.
So we're here live from FlipCon 16. Ken, Ryan Bennett, Aaron Sams, Tyler DeWitt, and we have Kate Baker and April Grass on the phone remotely.
Woohoo!
Flip class.
Yes,
You
woohoo!
have questions for us, Kate? Our remote roving reporter.
So I would love to know, first off, how is the weather in Texas? Is it as hot as I imagined?
Hot.
Really hot.
But it's 10 degrees inside the buildings, which is why I'm wearing my hoodie.
Now, is it India hot, like Mumbai hot?
It is not Mumbai hot.
All right.
Whew, because that was my first thought, was like, oh my God, Texas in the summer? We're going to be
I know,
jumping out into the pool.
We were
I'm telling
joking.
you, it's like going to,
We started at
it's like
8.
visiting hell in the summer. Yeah.
We're avoiding the oppressive.
Or air conditioning during the heat. No, I'm fine here.
Okay.
This is when I usually hang up on my mother when she starts talking about the weather. It's like, all right, gotta go, Mom. See ya. We've digressed really, really quickly on this call.
So, can you give me a recap of the keynote this morning, right? We had some keynotes and some big sessions.
Actually, why don't you just deliver the entire keynote again?
All right, I'm gonna need a piano
Yeah.
because I gotta play a little, play some scales. All right, so 30 second, maybe 60-second recap. I talked about why I think flipped teaching is so valuable. And I think it's so valuable because it captures what teachers do best, which is taking complicated information and making it simple for students. And when teachers do that, there's a lot of stuff that they leave out, and there's a lot of stuff that kind of works against them that they have to remove. And that's like all the jargon and a lot of complicated language that you have in textbooks. It's lots and lots of prerequisites, where if you want to take any sort of a non-linear learning approach, it gets really tricky when you can't find a single textbook that talks about subject D without saying, oh, first you have to memorize everything about A, B, and C first. So stuff like that. We can get rid of all that in a flipped learning approach, and teachers can do what they do best, which is engaging kids, making information accessible. And previously, before flipped learning, there was no really good way to bottle that, right? A teacher would do brilliant, amazing things in their classroom, making information engaging, fun, accessible. But once the students leave the classroom, poof, it's gone. And so I think flipped learning is great because, well, textbooks are enduring, but now finally, the brilliant ways that teachers interact with their students, the way they think lessons should be presented and taught, that can be bottled, that can be enduring too. So these types of learning approaches can be just as enduring now as things like textbooks and more traditional education materials.
Tyler, can I ask you a question about the nonlinear approach you're talking about? Yeah. Do you think the nonlinearity and the efficacy of teaching and learning that way is a function of the way humans naturally teach and learn? Or is it a function of the way that our society has become more nonlinear in the way we just access information because of the on-demand climate that we're in, because we have smartphones in our pocket? Or do you have any idea of why that works, why the nonlinear approach works?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think that definitely with having lots of information at our fingertips with Wikipedia, Google, and so forth, we're more familiar and we're more comfortable with the idea of nonlinear learning. But I would argue that the real, true, authentic learning that we do as human beings is nonlinear. Right? Think about what happens when you move to a new city. Okay? Maybe that city's got a subway. The first thing you got to do is you got to figure out how to get from your house to your job on the subway, right? So you have a tiny little piece of the urban experience, the subway system that you master, right? Then you meet a couple friends. You need to figure out how you're going to get to their house. And then you begin to realize, okay, there are different subway lines. Some of them run local. Some of them run express. None of this was initially important when you're just getting from your house to your job, right? And as what you need to know expands, you dive deeper and deeper and deeper. So this is a perfect example of nonlinear learning. I always ask people, I'm from New York City, which has a really complicated subway system. A lot of people, they say, oh, nonlinear learning doesn't work, it's not natural, things have to be explained in a very logical progression. I always say, okay, so when you first moved to New York, did you sit down in front of the subway map for 6 hours, memorize every line, every station, and all the specifics? And they're like, no, of course not. I learned what I needed to learn, and that's exactly my point. That is
Well, I would say Sir Ken Robinson would dovetail on that too, right? That we've linearized education, back at the turn of the century, just to help us, with our more handling education. It hasn't changed since then.
right, absolutely. And I really think that our brains are wired to learn. We were wired to learn long ago from our experiences that we had as early men and early humans, and so forth. And so we're all about having experiences in the real world, learning from that, and then being able to broaden those experiences. So I think that's really nonlinear learning at its heart. That's a great question.
And non-linear learning, I would think, is also driven by our needs too. So to kind of go back to your analogy of the moving to a new city, yeah, the need to get to work, but then think about all those other little places, like I need a grocery store. Oh, a pipe breaks. Now I need a plumber. So how does our needs as learners also drive that non-linear process too?
And then, Kate, to even go on that, you can get into personalized learning. That if I need a grocery store, but your pipe bursts, but mine doesn't. I can get the information personalized and experiential when I need it, as opposed to when someone else needs it.
Exactly.
So can I ask you a musical question? Because I have a musical background as well. So a lot of what you're talking about, this idea of linear learning, that you got to learn your skills first, versus the just kind of learning the thing that you need at the time. It struck me as the difference between classical music and jazz.
Right.
Now, as a musician myself, I was always an okay improviser, but I became a better improviser when I actually went back and I learned like the blues scales and things like that. It's very much the learning the skills approach. So where's the balance, I guess, between the things you just got to learn, the basics, if you will, and then this idea of nonlinear learning and diving into a particular spot, picking up what you need along the way. Where do those fit together?
That's such a great question. So I'm a big fan of context. I'm also a big fan of the basics. I just don't think that it's particularly effective when we introduce these basics out of context. Okay, so the example that I gave, some very basic finger exercises for piano, which certainly strengthen the fingers and they get the fingers used to moving, but they are boring as all get out. Just da 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 da. And so the idea is, the fingers are sort of, moving in this sort of a way. Now, you take a kid who's really interested in rock and roll or some sort of, even a kid who's interested in classical, and a skilled teacher can say, well, I can think of some exercises for you to do. Fingers moving pretty much the exact same way, but put those finger movements in context. I always like to say that the bass line that you play in rock and roll piano is pretty much, it is not identical, but is incredibly similar to what you're doing in these really boring finger exercises. So it's like, why is there this assumption that we always have to take the basics out of context in order for them to be built upon later, right? So Aaron, you mentioned the idea of jazz scales and blues scales helping you become a better improviser, and I totally agree, right? You build that foundation, and that really helps you become a more proficient practitioner. But the deal is, it's not particularly useful unless you know why you're doing it, right? If someone just said, okay, you're going to learn some jazz, you're not going to play a lick of jazz, you're going to spend a year memorizing all the different blues scales and jazz scales, who's going to want to do that? But if you can introduce it in context, and here's this chord, you play these scales over and oh, look, that sounds pretty cool. Then I think there's much more of an interest to learn those things.
Yeah, so in education, something that happened, an analogy that I use would be looking at Bloom's taxonomy. What you're talking about is learn the basics first. You're starting, it's a bottom-up. From what I understand, most of the research does at any point and move freely up and down, accessing information when we need it and applying it as appropriate.
Yeah, mute April for a second too, because she's kind of noisy.
Thank you, sir. I'll get it.
There it is. All right, she's got it.
Yeah, and I think you're totally right. And I think that's a whole part of becoming a lifelong learner and understanding that we're not, that our learning doesn't have to be driven by some sort of a linear philosophy, right? You were saying earlier that, you're really into music. You realized that you weren't the world's best improviser. So, you were relatively high up on Bloom's taxonomy, And then you realize, okay, so there are these foundations down here that I need to, dive back down and master in order to, so we're really kind of, you're improvising, we're really at the top of that Bloom's taxonomy pyramid of creating, right? So you realize I gotta dip way down to pick up some of these skills, but then that's gonna let me bounce back up. Yeah, and so I think there's also the metacognitive aspect of that as well, right? Teaching students, teaching really anyone, not just students, lifelong learners, teaching people to recognize exactly like what skills they want to get better at and where they got to dive down.
And they can make those decisions themselves and not wait for someone to tell them what to do.
And so is that where the role of the teacher then comes in? Because something that I hear people often say about the value of a teacher is students don't know what they don't know, and they need the expert to help them identify that. Because even if they are going through this process of metacognition, they might not have the background or the foundation to be able to actually identify them accurately.
Yeah, totally. I totally agree with you. And that's, I think, what a really effective teacher.
To go back to your point about context, I think this is now where the teacher role comes into play. Like, Aaron, you say, like, well, students don't know what they don't know. Well, it's now the teacher's job to create these experiences, this context for them to discover what they know and what they don't know.
And give them the supporting environment so they feel they can take those risks that they're not used to, because they're used to, is this the right answer, Mr. Bauer? Is this what you're looking for? Where do I go next?
And that's what I love about the flipping aspect, is that it frees me from always being the one to have the right answer. Like, okay, so I could create the video, I can create these learning contexts where the students are exploring the content, but then because I'm using the technology to do that, now that frees me up as a person to now go facilitate my students through the process and talk to them face to face. Because when they do have a question and they say, well, I'm missing this information, I can say, okay, we'll go see the video or go use this tech tool and you'll find your answer.
Absolutely.
It's now accountability with them.
I think the interaction between context and that scaffolding.
Say that again, April.
We lost you,
Sorry.
April. Scaffolding.
Scaffolding and context. Oh, it's going to be a good point too.
Make something up, Kim. Hurry,
April.
Hurry.
Well, I was going to cut us off for a bit, so you got to present pretty soon, Aaron. And you guys
To learn what a complete sentence is.
Yeah, but
are you there, April? Can you finish that question?
Yeah, no, I was just saying that there's an interplay between reading and becoming a better writer. The same way we're talking about letting students know what they do and they don't know, and having them explore what they know and what they don't know.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
all right.
So I'm going to wrap this up here because these gentlemen probably need to eat, and there's still some food left. But I want to thank Tyler, and I want to thank Aaron, as well as Kate and April.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us. We miss you, Kate.
I know, I miss you guys. I wish I could be there.
You're here now.
I know. I'm lurking on Twitter, so get ready.
Awesome. Thanks, and we'll be in touch real soon. Thanks for doing this, everyone, and I'll
care.
try and do
Thanks a
another
lot.
one later.
See you guys later.
Cheers.